Hi, this is Pastor Ryan, Calvary Chapel, Wellington, and welcome to our discipleship resource course in Christology. The name of the course is Who Do You Say I Am? This was a question that Jesus asked the disciples, and this week we're going to be covering the deity of Christ. What if immediately following this video, after seeing who I am, perhaps you even know me a little bit, what if somebody were to come up to you and say, Pastor Ryan Borkin, I know him as well. And then they began to describe to you a man that was over 6 foot tall, long blonde hair, blue eyes, incredibly muscular, one of the biggest men they've ever seen, they tell you. And furthermore, they were to tell you that I'm single, that Pastor Ryan Borkin is single, and that he has no children. And then they were to tell you, not only is he single, has no children, he looks this way, but he's not the pastor of Calvary Chapel Wellington, or not a pastor at Calvary Chapel Wellington, but rather he's a pastor over at a local Baptist church. At what point would you begin to wonder if the Pastor Ryan Borkin they're describing is the same one that you know and have seen? At what point would you maybe even consider that they're making up something that they know nothing about? You see, the deity of Christ is in fact probably one of the most important doctrines to the Christian faith. It describes an important characteristic in nature of who Jesus Christ is. Without such, the importance of his sacrifice, the importance of his coming is greatly diminished. Consider, if you would with me, John chapter 1. This is an area of scripture that I believe talks to this very doctrine. It's John chapter 1, picking up in verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not the light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light which gives light to every man coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, as we read that together, I wanted you to consider a few things. First, at the very beginning, it says clearly, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, I know that there are certain translations and certain groups out there that try to inject into that area of Scripture the word a. He was a God. That couldn't be further from the correct translation and a correct understanding of that verse. But consider beyond that, if you would, with me for a moment. It says that he was in the beginning with God. You have to understand, it doesn't say that he was made in the beginning. It doesn't say that he came after the beginning, but he was with God at the very beginning. It also states that all things were made through him. And finally, if there's any confusion about who this Word is that they're talking about, in verse 14 it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth, making it impossible to think that this verse is speaking of anybody other than Jesus Christ. Now, the truth of the matter is back many years ago, it was all that was necessary to ask somebody to find out if they were a Christian or not, or a believer in God or not, was to simply ask them, well, do you believe in God? And if they said yes, we might just assume, well, they're a Christian, they're okay. Later on, it was important to ask a person not just so much do you believe in God, but do you believe in Jesus? And if they said yes, and that was okay, and we just moved on. But in the society and the world that we live in today, it's not simply enough to ask somebody if they believe in Jesus, but what Jesus they believe in. You see, if you were to ask the Muslim, perhaps, if they believe in Jesus, they might say, yes, we absolutely do, a prophet, a great prophet. If you were to ask a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon, yes, he is the Son of God, but he is an offspring of God, not equal with God. He is a deity, but a lesser one at that. You see, you could even probably go up to a historian a secular humanist, an atheist, and say, do you believe in Jesus? And they might tell you, yes, we do. We believe he was a great historical figure, but not God. There have been some that have suggested that the deity of Christ is simply a made-up doctrine created by Constantine or created by a later following of Christ, later following within the church, simply to trump up the belief in Jesus Christ. But I want to make the argument that the scriptures not only tell you and tell us that Christ was very much fully God and equal with God, but it does it in numerous areas. Now, I don't want you to assume that the Bible is going to make an argument for the deity of Christ. It won't make an argument for it. However, there is plenty of evidence in it. What I mean by that is we have to understand the historical context with which the scriptures were written. You see, the believers and those that lived during that time, they weren't trying to argue for something that they already believed. It was an assumption that those that were going to read the scriptures and read the story of Christ, these were men and women that already knew he was God. And so therefore, as we read in John, it simply mentions it and moves on, not necessarily making an argument for their point, but stating it as a fact to which they already believe. Now, concerning some of the arguments against the deity of Christ, again, some have suggested that it is a later doctrine that was created by men. If this was the case, though, it would simply be void from the historical records. There are documents, letters written by early church fathers that suggest that this was a belief that they held with even within the first century. Furthermore, some have suggested, well, this belief in the deity of Christ, it's simply a mimicry, a belief that was stolen from other religions. I would suggest that even if that's the case, it doesn't make the truth of the deity of Christ, doesn't make the deity of Christ doctrine any less of a core doctrine to the Christian faith. Just because there is a similar belief in another religion doesn't make this belief in our Christian faith any less true. Lastly, I want to conclude with a verse, another simple statement, if you will, concerning the deity of Christ. It is found in 1 Timothy chapter 3. In verse 16 it says, "And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifested in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up in glory." And I want to point your attention again to the very beginning of verse 16, "and without controversy." This is something that is a non-negotiable in the Christian faith. Either you believe he's God and fully God and equal with God, or you don't. And if that is the case, then you have believed in another Jesus, one in which the Bible does not teach about. I would encourage you this week, as you follow along with this course and this study, dig through the scriptures. Find yourself some new verses, some other verses that perhaps I didn't mention here today, that support and further indicate that Christ was God. Thank you, and I hope you have a blessed week.